The events and entertainment sector has been paralyzed. No physical events meant no work for service providers, infrastructure like sound venues and their staff, sanitation, persons in decor, security, caterers, and vendors of all sorts. We have, since the start of the pandemic in the Barbadian context, have successfully held some events during the period, but as parameters change, we have realized that our operating parameters have to be changed even more. Not necessarily stopped, but a dynamism of a change of the operating procedures. So what does the future look like for us? Jetsons on FETs? Today, I would like to welcome a diverse panel to discuss this topic from their perspectives, from their experiences, of course, and what they may have learned during the period as we look on to the wider world to see what else is going on within our sector. We have with us this evening, and they could just raise their hands so that you can identify them. Mr. Brian Worrell, he's the CEO of Colors Entertainment. He's also a member of the Entertainment Association of Barbados, as well as the Barbados Association of Masqueraders. We have Mr. Orlando Newton, the CEO of Ticket Pal Caribbean and the Managing Director of Nouvelle Vie with us this evening. Orlando. Thank you. Miss Jennifer Seeley, the Artistic Director of Dance in Africa. Dr. Erica Smith, the CEO of COSCA. Mr. Andre Hoyt, the Senior Business Development Officer of the National Cultural Foundation. Mr. Raj Shatrani, the CEO of Happy Hospitality. Hi, Raj. And our special guest this evening, Dr. Adana Grandison, who is a member of the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners. She is a lecturer at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. And she also sits on the Barbados Association, oh sorry, BAMP, I just used BAMP, their COVID-19 task force. We have a fantastic panel to present today. I am DeCarla Appawait. I present myself this evening as the Secretary of the Barbados Association of Event Professionals, as well as a lecturer in event management for BIMAP and the Barbados Community College, as well as the executive producer of BIF, one of several different hats I perhaps would hold during when the event sector is up and going strong. This evening, I would like to start with the discussion. And opening and start asking the question of what does each person see in the future shaping of events. Just a brief welcome statement, and of course, please further introduce yourselves by extension in this opening question. Let's start with Brian.
Hi, good evening to everyone. Well, DeCarla, I am thankful for the opportunity to be here this evening. Firstly, to I represent Colors Entertainment, like you said, and I'm also a member of Entertainment Association of Barbados and BAM, Masqueraders Association. And firstly, I would like to speak about the band perspective and what we've been through for the past year. COVID would have hit home for us, March 2020, and many of us would have been already starting our preparations for the year, looking forward to another successful popover. And with COVID coming in, that derailed a lot of plans that we would have had. And subsequent to that, we have been, you know, making plans as an association to plan ahead for COVID and this environment that we're in and what is possible and not possible as far as being able to participate and do things as we usually would or some form or format of that. And I think that this discussion today will be helpful. You know, I'm here not only to contribute, but also to listen and hear ideas that other practitioners in the industry would have and ideas that they would throw out. And some of those things that we can institute going forward for 2021 to see what's possible, you know, having an opportunity to hear from someone like Andre, you know, who works with the NCF that we work closely with, and plans that they may have for the season coming ahead will also be very, very, very important for me this evening to hear. So I will defer to one of the other speakers and I look forward to a productive session this evening.
Thank you, Brian. Jennifer? Jennifer, you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. Yes, I said I'm glad to be here, and I'm in an esteemed panel, and I am looking forward to discussion as to where we can go in the future. And one of the things I'm very certain about is that of paramount importance must be the safety of the event planners, the safety of the performers, the safety of our audiences. And we have to look towards what is viable, what is possible with that in the forefront of our minds. Of course, we want to come out, we want to entertain, and we want to make money, but safety is of extreme importance. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Orlando?
Yes, as the others have said, I'm very excited about this entire project in its entirety. With people like Erica, who have been stellars in this industry, Raj, and the others, Brian, Andre. I think that from a Ticket Pals perspective or from the technology perspective, we're looking to see and get a better directive of where things are going. A lot of things have already was already in place for such. I want to say we were expecting it, but the contactless systems were already in place when it comes to events. The tracking systems were already in place. But what we have looked at even more is trying to assist our marketplace, or we don't want to call it promoters, let's call it executive producers, in looking at new ways of raising revenues and being safe, as Jennifer said, at the same time. So I look forward to tons of information being shared and being educated at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Erica?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for inviting me. 2020 started for COSCAT with a lot of hope. We had plans to celebrate our 20th anniversary. Obviously, everything got derailed. And, you know, we have just over 1,200 members. And it really very quickly negatively affected them in varying levels. But the truth is we had to quickly change our plans and go into gear in terms of how do we offer our members support, bearing in mind that our revenue comes from licensing. So, you know, once there was the shutdown and now the second shutdown, and no activities, it has meant no funds coming in, or at least there've been, you know, very little trickling in. So COSCAP as an organization has been feeling it as well. We're under a lot of pressure to help our members, but in terms of the future, well, I'm positive. I think it will take some time before we get back to quote normal in terms of numbers, but I think there's a lot of enthusiasm, you know, for activity to start again. Like Jennifer, I am, you know, I'm cognizant that we need to put safety first and health first. But I think once things get started, you know, it would be very positive. So for me, I'm keen to engage with the executive producers and, you know, colleagues like Andrea to see what role COSCAP can play and how we can position ourselves to really assist or facilitate with that restart, bearing in mind that obviously we're a business too, but I think we will all have to work together to jumpstart, you know, once events start back again. Thanks.
Thank you too. Andre, good evening.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, DeCarlo, for inviting me to take part in this panel discussion. I think for me, because I wear several hats apart, along with working at the National Cultural Foundation and heading up their business development department. I also am a tutor at BCC, and in fact, I would have been the developer of the Innovation for Commercial Creativity curriculum, part of that degree which DeCarlo teaches as well. In my own right, I am a commercial creativity developer, and I also sit with the Goldsmiths University of London Guild of International Entrepreneurs. And so seeing COVID, I obviously from the NCF perspective would have been at the heart of what was necessary to kind of, I wouldn't say ride it through, but be able to handle the pressures of COVID. My department would have been responsible for the distribution of more than $1.3 million in COVID grants. Of course, we would have held our BizTalk series. During that time, we would have held our program with CDB looking at how we could best exist in a COVID environment from event and festivals perspective. And of course, there are three main things that we started at. And that was the whole notion that we really needed to take the opportunity to help creatives understand their business models and look at them more closely and perhaps trim them down or pivot where they needed to pivot along their value chain, things that they needed to change and impact on how they were going to survive. And of course, the whole notion of resilience and having that hope and belief that you could do something, and therefore accessing what was available at that time for you to do so. What I am hopeful in seeing as we are recovering, if I can use that word, from COVID and from the ash, is really seeing how creatives take the lead in causing their change, impacting on their own change, and pivoting in the way that they see best for them. And what I would like to say to Carl is that one of the things that we really identified along this process in 2020 and taking stock and evaluating where our creatives were, over 125 creatives got funding from the NCF. But one of the key things that was very clear to us is understanding and ownership of your content, and whether that content was moving from a physical space, festivals, operations, or to the space of a musician. Understanding the content, its value, and ownership of that content was one of the things that we wanted to effect through the COVID fund, and I think we were to some extent able to do so. So, for example, if you are a festival producer, content, the audio and video content of that festival has a value. What were you doing with it? If you didn't have it before, how were you going to be using it? Were you using it from an advertising and investment perspective? Were you using it from a perspective of generating immediate revenue on platforms where you could sell and promote festivals? So those are some of the things that I would want to start with in terms of what our contribution can be to this discussion.
Thank you very much for that, Andre. I'd like to invite Raj to make his opening statement.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Raj Chatrani, CEO of Hospitality. So operate Copacabana and a couple other restaurants, do events and event planning, etc. Obviously, this has been a rough year for all of us. After the first lockdown, did however get the opportunity to do a lot of events and collaborate with many. And I think I'm very fortunate to having worked with various parts of the industry and from all different sides. And we have to figure out what is our way forward, I think. There is obviously a way forward. I'm very optimistic. Safety is going to be number one. But from an operational point of view, like with all the new protocols and vaccinations, are we going to have vaccine passports? Are we going to have people having to test before events? I think we need to understand what is the next, say, 6 months going to look like. And is it 6 months? Is it 3 months? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? We don't know, but we have to plan for all variations of what's to come, I think. And we have to put a plan in place and make sure it's safe and feasible. And we need to start to at least try at some point in time to hold an event. I don't think until we get to that again and we come up with a safe way to actually move forward, then there's still a lot of unknown. But I always remain very optimistic. I think the future is bright. I think the opportunity to kind of rethink business, how we operate, and somewhat in that sense a blessing. We can make ourselves better for what we do, and be ready for a new future ahead, a new world.
Okay, Raj. I was just checking because your levels were going in and out, right? So I don't know if it was my end. But thank you for that, Raj. I think it really sets the tone. I made a note of one of the things that would have just come out from the press conference with the Prime Minister just over an hour ago, and with the statement that the state of emergency is to be extended another 5 months. And of course, getting ready to come into this discussion, I started to wonder what did that 5 months of the extension of the state of emergency would really mean, because I think it takes us down to September. But before we jump into that discussion, I just want to introduce you briefly to Adana, and she will be speaking from, yes, a medical perspective. And I think it's very important that we, as event professionals, would also engage the outlook from the medical fraternity, because regardless of what our plans may be, it is very important for us to also have a deeper understanding of what is actually going on out there what necessarily we'll be up against. I think everyone in their opening statements mentioned the health and safety involved. Adana, what are your quick thoughts?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, DeColor, for inviting me to this panel discussion. I really think that it is a very needed discussion to have. It is certainly an opportunity for BAMP to once again take the opportunity to educate and really reinforce the importance of this virus and certainly the importance of testing. Especially in a space where we wish to potentially reopen and get back to what everyone is calling normal and probably adopt a new normal. But certainly with that, there is always the concern for safety, and public health really needs to be at the epicenter of such. So this evening really is an opportunity for me to really clarify which tests, when to use those tests, and really what measures need to be in place so that we can safely reopen, not just for entertainment, but the country as a whole, to reduce any possible chances of things like variants presenting within the country and vaccine escape. So I'm very, very happy to get into this discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. I think we should really get into the meat of the matter. Everyone here was very demure in their introductions, but we are really looking at the future. And I think it's very important as an event collective that we don't necessarily wait until someone tells us what the future looks like. We, like everyone else, we are privy to a lot of information as it pertains to what is going on in the world and in the country. So we know what necessarily what are we facing. So we know we're going to be living not in a post-COVID experience, but perhaps more so in a COVID world. So what is it that necessarily that we can put in place? Because not only are we doing things, that we are hosting things, we have about 3 layers that we have to consider. We have to consider ourselves as event producers, the entertainment aspects of it, and of course our guests. We are noting around the world that events are starting to happen. More and more people are becoming vaccinated. There's going to be a sports stadium that is opening up a section for all vaccinated. They're saying that you must wear your mask, but they're identifying themselves as being vaccinated versus the sitting every other seat, or looking at the capacity, the indoor event versus the outdoor event. In the last couple of weeks, we've started to see things change. I mean, the Oscars are coming up, and they're opening up with a peculiarity. There are the ideas of virtual events. There are the ideas of hybrid events. How does this fit when you start to think how you are going to be shaping what your entertainment product could possibly look like? We're going to be looking at it from the perspective of entertainers, and we're going to be also looking at it from the perspective of producers. And Erica, this would also include you, because I'm very interested in finding out how event might be classed in terms of your licensing perspective, because we know a lot of those are coming up, and we're also seeing a mix of virtual and live events and how they would be seen and how we should take them. So I open up the floor. Anyone from the panel, anything?
Well, I'm not sure if I should
But,
go
yeah,
first
you could go ahead, Andre.
to get myself out of the way. But I think there are a couple of things. Number one, I think that we have to start at the point of accessing what's available to us from a resource perspective. I can tell you that the NCF, the Culture Industry Development Fund, is available to all practitioners who are registered as approved cultural practitioners. And that fund is part of the Culture Industries Act framework that you can find out under section 4 as part of the artist registry and monitoring framework, etc. And section 33. The fund allows you to have funding for developing your products and for marketing your products. So that's something that's accessible to you. People may want to take the opportunity to use the incentives on duty-free waivers in the app to help them if they are looking to upgrade their spaces, equipment, etc. Through the app and having a license from the NCF, you can import things that are in the tools of trade. I know that in your category, there are quite a few things from lighting and other technical things that are there that you may want to import and have the duty waive. You may want to take the opportunity to do that if you are looking to try to refresh yourself and so on. I will say that it's going to be important that as an organization that you really start to think about what your handbook is going to look like, and let your handbook be your guide to put you through this process, even in terms of how you lobby government agencies. That handbook should be something that all your members see as the way to do things that you will put in place. We at the NCF, we would have just hosted, along with the government of Barbados, hosted the production of a huge Netflix production, and that had to do with the fact that our film commissioner had indeed looked at guidelines and policies and created a handbook of how you can shoot film in Barbados in a COVID environment. And she would have had to share that with the Ministry of Health as well. They had to be involved. And so we were able to successfully have that Netflix production. And there are other productions that are interested in coming to Barbados as well because of that. So we had the handbook, we had the protocols, we showed them how it was done. It was done successfully in a very difficult environment. And therefore, there's an example of a process that anyone who wants to film now has to follow. In between that, there are some persons who are obviously doing shorter things and smaller film products and projects, but that protocol is what allowed them to do that. So I think you, as an association, you then have to think about what's going to be in your protocol handbook for you. How will you operate in terms of your events? Have you identified specific spaces and size venues that you think it can work based on what may be the requirement for distancing? How do you deal with things like moving in and out of that space? What technology will you bring to areas such as catering services for production, performers, tech, crews, and members of your public? What is the ratio of physical versus digital that you're going to be having in your business model? Are you now going to be moving to an 80% visual platform versus a 20% physical in space? What is needed to make this work? For example, do you need IT support? And therefore, what you're applying for your funding from the National Cultural Foundation may be the IT support that's needed for your general platforms to be used not only by yourself as producers, but members of your audience. Are you recording events from multiple screening? And in which case, what type of agreements are you going to be put in place in your handbook for the players who may need to collect royalties? Are you thinking about royalty collection? From a music component perspective, in your event, maybe a live event, but the byproduct of that event could be a musical component that is collected, that becomes the product of the event. When it comes to other ownerships and so on, the music may be owned by other people, but that is something that you may want to trade. And so I think that's going to be very important for you, that handbook, how you relate it to the shifting markets. For example, in your discussion last week, I know there was a big emphasis on international markets and international audiences, but with 288,000 Barbadians plus visitors and so on, smaller amount of people who may be residing here, are you going to be concentrating your product on a local perspective, and in which case you may be attracting more sponsorship in your business model, because the local sponsors, maybe the people who will now be focusing on this local market for consumption, etc. Or I remember Orlando talked about the possibility of taking your product globally, and in which case are you looking to attract international sponsors? So these are some of the things that you really need to have in your handbook, your new operational guide. There are people who can help some of your producers. Everyone may not be at the same scale. Who's at what scale? What kind of support is needed for them? All these are things that as a entity you may want to have, you know, in going forward, and things that can perhaps impact on you immediately in a positive way.
Andrea, that was a good soliloquy you guys gave. I agree with everything that you said. I am also interested in finding out what is the start point for opening for events. So the structure and you know, the digitizing versus physical space, all those things are important. In that handbook you're speaking of, I'm interested in knowing, you know, what is the start point for persons like myself that are promoters, band and a band leader and so on. There are persons here that are entertainers. Everything ties into each other in entertainment. So as a promoter, and I have to book artists, you know, I everything comes down to a budget and how much money we put into doing these events. So the problem we had last year with opening up to doing events was that the larger events were at a disadvantage because obviously they couldn't, you know, host as many people as they're accustomed to. And they had to then try ways in which to reformat and try different things. For some promoters like myself that do smaller type events where the numbers may still work, you know, they were about 300 or so that you could have worked with, but that doesn't work into the category for everybody that's in the industry to earn. And I don't want us to fool ourselves and thinking that entertainment is just about entertaining. It's about earning. It's about, you know, us being viable players in the market and making money. So
sorry, I got knocked off and I know thing. So when you click it, what does you see?
I don't know who's talking.
Sorry, I found
Right.
the person.
So I think it's important for us to have an idea as to when we do open, and I agreed with the other speakers before about the safety, because safety is paramount. So for me, the structure where we're going to set up our events that we can safely social distance is first and foremost important. I know we had previous conversations, Andre, in other forums about digitizing, and I am yet to understand how the benefits of digitizing. In turn, I could get it from streaming content and so on, but in terms of us as promoters using the digital platforms to earn, it is really difficult, and some more knowledge is needed from persons like yourself and others in the industry to help share that information for others in the business to understand what they can do, right? The other item I wanted to talk about was funding. For a lot of us that haven't had a chance to earn in the industry for over a year, for us to now start up to do any sort of event, maybe an entertainer or artist that wants to record, they may be out of pocket now to even book studio time, you know, to get their record done. For a person like myself that is going to do a band, that it takes X amount of $1,000 to get the band, you know, all of the necessary things that you need to develop the band. You haven't earned in your business for over a year. We've already invested money last year. What shorties do we have in terms of opening the industry to allow us back in to safeguard ourselves against losses? So when we come out in the industry and we decide we're going to spend money again, and then there's a, you know, a shutdown or events start to get canceled again, what is our safety net? I think that is important for us in the industry to know that we are already out of pocket. And if we are going to invest again, we have to have some sort of safety net to protect ourselves before we can go back out and decide to get back in the industry full-fledged again.
Is this a discussion then? I'm sorry, Jennifer, but is this a discussion, Brian, then where we look at the idea of event insurance, or are we looking at investment?
I don't want to seem like I am leaning too heavily on the government, right? But they have a part to play in us coming back out in the industry, to be honest. Um, other sectors within Barbados do get help when they are struggling times, and I believe that we too fall into an important sector in Barbados in terms of what we bring to the economy of Barbados. And I think that we should be getting some assistance where a structure needs to be set up, though, let me say that first, where it's just not free for all, for everybody to just do as they want to, but a structure needs to be in place where you can register and let your business be known and then seek funding for the project you want to bring forward. Let's say crop over is on for this year. If we get the go ahead from Ministry of Health, Culture, and the government as a whole, when the players that participate in crop over want to get involved, where is the funding coming from for them to start their project?
Okay,
That's my question.
Well,
sorry. Oh, go ahead, Andre. Andre, then Jennifer, and Adana has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, I thought that Brian was asking me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So first of all, Brian, let me first say that I am not here to tell you when or how crop over is going to occur. Let me just make that very clear. But what I can say to you is that the Culture Industries Development Fund is actually there for project execution. So as you know, you can speak to any of my staff members and myself on the process of that. As it relates to if you wanted to use a studio to record music, we actually do have a studio where we can possibly waive the studio time for the Creative Arts Center, which is in Pelican, which we have available and it's functioning. And we've already made that available to some creatives. We already do have had creatives last year who actually would have requested funding for us to assist them in the execution of some of their events. So we are doing this. So it's a matter of whether people's projects have the overall benefit, they are employing X amount of persons, etc. And so that you can see that the impact is not just to an individual, but to a wider cross-section of persons. So yes, we're there to assist. As it relates to investment, for example, people have already used the Section 31 in the Culture Industries Act to attract investors, and investors who are benefiting right now with that investment, because once they invest in your product, they can actually write off that investment on their assessable income for 5 years. And we do have investors who've worked with practitioners and are doing that. So that may be something you may want to use as a tool when you are looking to speak to some of your sponsors, because there are sponsors who've actually used it as well. But we are here to essentially, we have the framework and structures in place. It's for you to see how best they will assist you.
Thanks, Andre.
Thank you. Jennifer, you were interjecting when Brian was speaking the first time. So I think your point is part of that. And then Adana.
Yes, I heard a lot about structure, but one of the things that I would like to place on the table is really a price structure as well. And when I say that, I speak especially in COVID times, because we have different forms of entertainment for our travelers. We have people who perform on the hotel circuit. You have the others who may be doing work at, say, what's the name of the place there on Bay Street? Not Copacabana, but that may be one. But anyhow, the point I'm making is that there are different prices, and I'm just wondering if in the interest of entertainers, if there's somebody that can look at that pricing. Some of us are not able to negotiate as well as others. And one of the things that I found recently, since we opened up, I had to do 2 performances relating to entertainment for Netflix guests. And there are 2 of our regular entertainers who said to me, I said, budget is not as strong as one would like. And they said, Miss Seeley, after the issues that I have had, being out of pocket, not having any funding and so, or having to use up all of my resources, I shall be adding national insurance, the cost of national insurance to my fee. And I mean, I could not blame them for it, but those are the things that we've got to think of also coming out. And you know, how can we work within a specific price structure? I would agree that there will be certain things that we do that ought to be tiered. We may have the 5-star hotels, we may have those who may. I'm also thinking that we need to be able to negotiate, not just for ourselves, but collectively.
Okay, thank you for that. That is agreed, and that sense of cooperativeness, I think, is definitely a takeaway that we should consider. I will go back to Andre too, and it will help me segue to Adana, where he suggested that the association look at or any association, I shouldn't say the association, look at setting up protocols and standardization. And he spoke of the experience with the film commissioner and the Netflix production and the setting up of protocols and things like that. And you know, we have sat here. I have seen the protocols as it pertains to events. We may not necessarily been so privy into the assistance of the protocols, but the protocols for events and all other protocols that have been set up have all been set up in silos. We may not necessarily be privy to the protocols until they necessarily come out. So then how do we affect change as it pertains to those said protocols, or be included in the discussion as it regularizes in terms of those protocols? And I know this is a discussion too that BAMP would have had, and you know, with the setting up of the COVID-19 task force and their inclusion. Not sure if this is where Adana wants to go, but Adana, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, DeCarla. And I hear the concerns of Brian, where he's really concerned for loss. And I even hear it being echoed by Miss Seeley. Miss Seeley actually taught me at Urdeston. But certainly, I think the best way really to ensure that you try to decrease the amount of losses that you have is really to mitigate the risk by ensuring that you have very strong protocols in place and certainly strong testing protocols in place. Right now, I think there is a need for a very efficient flow of testing. Still here in Barbados, we have not really normalized testing on our island. You know, we are simply testing persons, or persons are really seeking testing when they are primary contacts, or if they think they have been exposed, whether primary or secondarily. Whereas internationally, that is really not the case. And I think we need to really start to normalize testing so that we can know as a country where we truly are. Not just PCR testing either, because one may often argue, you know, let's put in place rapid testing, rapid antigen testing. But the rapid antigen test was really put out there for use in persons who are symptomatic. And I think that we also need to ensure that when we are setting out the protocols, when you guys are setting out your protocols, to ensure that you're actually choosing the right test. Here, the only way that we can really move 2 steps forward and continue to plow forward is if we have the necessary research and the information and the use of technology that can back us to continuously move forward. If we don't do it in a safe manner, what would happen is that, yes, we will get 2 weeks open, we will have some events, and then we will have another 8 weeks of complete lockdown. which long term is more detrimental to everyone, you know. And so I think there is really a need to ensure that we are doing proper testing, certainly some genomic surveillance. I know that a lot of persons are being concerned about the multiple variants, and certainly because Barbados is a melting pot, when we reopen and when we have ever opened our doors to visitors, we get visitors from all over the world. And when we look at the visitors that we have, certainly our source markets are the markets that have a lot of variants within them, the UK, the US. We do have persons coming from India, you know, and even up to today was another variant was discovered in India, which they're now thinking about is a triple mutation. So I think it's very, very important that we really take a very hard look and ensure that we are very efficient and we have very robust testing protocols in place, especially for your events.
Thank you, Adana. I think one major takeaway from that, and it's something that we would have discussed previously, is that even ourselves, and it also, it stems from even what Andre said in terms of preparing ourselves, that what can we do to expedite the process, because generally we are an engagement tool. People see us as an engagement tool when they think of arts and entertainment and events and culture, that we too will have to be part of the discussion where we are actually disseminating the information so as to sensitize the persons that we would consider to be our future patrons, and either or. I just like to always bring it back around to the idea of that we are developing what we think is how we can shape the future, how we can be necessarily part of the future. And I think it's very important that one of the things that comes out from this discussion is not necessarily for us in a sense of waiting for persons to tell us how to do it, but also to be main contributors, because this is our sector, and we must have ownership of it from the point of view. We are also part of the discussion to engage its reopening and its safe reopening. Orlando has his hand raised.
Yes, quite. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Correct. Quite interested with the conversation so far and where it's going. One of these things I was, because I'm quite tuned into this due to the fact that this is an industry that I'm solely supported by. I would say that I'm wearing multiple hats at the same time, from executive producer to service provider and data management at the same time. None of the services that are required and that need to be changed, I think it needs to be some consultants within the industry from different levels, if it is health, if it is government, if it's the NCF, due to the fact that we had opened before. We had events from the month of July to December, which majority of producers that were having events went above and beyond on protocols, and some protocols that they took were not even our protocols. We were told to follow the restaurant protocols, right? Not event protocols. One of the questions I want to ask Adana is, what numbers will be, I know you may not have the correct answer, but for example, I heard today that we're looking at 43 out of 10,000, those sort of numbers. When I talk to my colleagues around the world, they have a number in their country when they could expect the industry to reopen. We do not have a number in our industry in Barbados. Okay, answering Brian's question, when do we open? When do we start even look at trying to even invest into an event? And that is one of the growing concerns for us in the industry, is no one is asking us what we do have. No one is asking us what do we think. I know that the NCF is doing a great job from their standpoint, but from an executive producer, investor standpoint, a restaurant would say, and I know they have done it in the past, say 6 feet can't work for us to open a restaurant. They can say, okay, well, we can put it down to 3. So market said what they had to say, and they were listened to because of the economic impact. And from our standpoint, I think majority of what I'm hearing tonight is that there needs to be some sort of dialogue, even if it's with health, to find out what they're thinking, where they're going, to see how we could help. At the same time, for events, for example, with the ticket pal system, for years we were able to track who went to events. It's a cultural thing where people would always fight not to give their information, but that's a cultural thing in the entire Caribbean. But we do have the technology to do tracking on who goes to events. And that is one of the things I have been hearing talk about. If it is the vaccine passport, is that data is going to be given to the ticketing companies around the Caribbean to be able to track these people. And if there's no conversation with the industry, we cannot prepare for something that we do not know. So when we're told to open, we're going to open at a disadvantage and then fall back, as she said, within 2 weeks, we're going to fall back because we were not totally prepared, because we didn't have all the information necessary to move forward. So I think that is one of the key things that I think is some sort of connection among the entities in some sort of summit to really understand everything that is being considered by health and by others that are decision makers for our industry at the same time.
Okay.
Hi, Orlando. Thanks for the question. Firstly, I think before we can even consider a percentage, a number, the biggest problem that we are facing right now is that we do not have a sample that is representative of our population in terms of our testing. All right. Right now, we are testing too little on our country.
Okay.
So even if you get 8 out of 200, is that really representative of what's happening in Barbados? The answer to that is no. And that is why it's so important. And certainly I would hope that as entertainers, you guys would take this opportunity to really get the message out there to encourage persons to go out there and test and know what's happening on the island, because that is important. Generally, most scientists and research persons look for less than 5% in terms of when you can begin to start to relax measures. But that is with the virus of a wild type, where the transmission rate was really every single person that's infected probably will infect 2 to 3 persons. Now we have variants that one person can potentially infect 6 to 7 persons. So looking at a 5% rate in terms of positivity rate really might not even be the answer. You might be looking at something a little lower, a 2 or 3%, but certainly as it stands right now, the numbers that we have for testing are total every single day. We really cannot provide the information that we need in order to make the determinations, because we do not have enough testing. That's one. Secondly, you asked about the use of vaccine passports, and I think it is something that we need to take very seriously. One, vaccine passports have only really been introduced for border control here in Barbados, in terms of at the airport and at the seaport starting May 8th. Okay, that discussion really has not been had as it relates to for internal measures, and there's a reason for that, simply because you're dealing with the privacy of persons. Just like how I'm sure you wouldn't really want your medical records spilled all about the place being handled with non-medical personnel, because let's be very frank, Barbados sometimes can be quite officious in terms of how we go about, and sometimes very malicious as well, in terms of how we go about handling persons' personal information. And I think we need to be very, very careful when we're dealing with the privacy of persons. And your vaccine history certainly is a privacy issue. It can lead to lots of discrimination. If you don't have a vaccine, then what? Do I discriminate you in terms of work? Do I discriminate you in terms of what access you have to certain things? So we need to be very careful about that. And so I think that until really we have stepped up in terms, again, and I continue to hammer this home, until we step up in terms of the amount of testing that we are getting locally, and certainly building the capacity, the scalability of our lab here locally, then I think we are still far off.
Okay.
And
Yeah, then I have a question.
if I could quickly respond.
Now go ahead.
So two things. When the film commissioner was looking at how do we facilitate films coming to Barbados, the productions, she did have discussions with the BFEA. So now you are an agency that people may be able, authorities may be able to have discussions with. What we were not able to capture in the period which Orlando identified, September to December last year, were some of the habits in terms of the monitoring at those events. And that would have put us in a better position to understand what happens with an audience of 250, what happens with an audience of 500 people, how did people really communicate with each other, how closely did they interact, what was the relationship between the food vendors and so on. Those are the kind of things that that I'm saying you need to have in your handbook. This is what we're going to do that. Orlando mentioned the capacity that the ticketing system has. And those are the kind of things that you want to be able to articulate to the persons in authority. We, for example, had to speak to the Ministry of Health about prep for film crews. So a film crew can't prep inside of his room. There needs to be a space. So therefore, where is that space in a hotel? It meant that everybody had to be in a particular hotel. It meant that they had to function in a particular space to do their prep. So you're able to share with them from who have the authority to say yes or no. This is what we can do to make this thing happen. Now, one of the key things that you may want to think about, and not necessarily having someone's vaccine passport information there. In your drive as event promoters leading up to your events, one of the things you may actually want to say to the Ministry of Health is, we, as part of our promotion, we will actually have testing drives. This may be something that the association may want to work on in the next 3 to 4 months as you're preparing to come out of this, where you use your association that is responsible for event production and producing events and hosting events to increase or to raise that testing and vaccine and drive, but as an agency, as a group, as a collective that represents over 300 or 400 persons. So you may want to take that as something that you're putting on the table and providing to the Ministry of Health and to the government that demonstrates that you are putting these things in place. This is our playbook. This is how we're going to function as a sector in a COVID environment, or not just a COVID, but in a, I don't know if this is the right term, but a medical crisis environment almost. Or disease environment, whatever I'm not sure what's the right word, but this is how you will function going forward. And I think a lot of the times when we look at it, a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people don't have that. A lot of people don't have the actual business model of how they're functioning. How do you make money? They don't have that written anywhere in any plan. So when Jennifer is talking about fees, as an association, we've been arguing, sorry, not we, I'm an artist too, but I mean, that has been the argument. What is the basic fee per hour for a dancer, for a lighting technician? What are the basic fees? What are the basic fees for the people who jewel costumes? As an association, this is the opportunity for you to have your list, to say what the basic fees are. And in fact, you send that out to all the people who are essentially are going to be employing you. And this is the time that your membership drive is not seen as something where people just see you as a grouping only to come together for certain things, but they understand the benefit of it. As an association, you can lobby insurance companies for better health plans. You can lobby companies for things like pensions, because we have a lot of artists who at a certain age can't work any longer. They may have had an injury from dance. They may no longer can sing. There's so many things. So as an association, I think I applaud you for coming together. But these are some of the things that you may also want to put in place to help in times like these, and other times we don't know what's gonna happen. We didn't expect the ash fall. Just when we were getting out of this lockdown, boom, the ash came. So I think you really have to it's almost an estate planning in a way, but ensuring that no one can take advantage of the artists because they know they can one up the other one at a lower rate. It's a time for you to pivot and change the sector.
I agree. Dana, we have a question from the floor for you. I don't know if you noticed it in the chat from Kareem. Thank you so much, Kareem, for that. Noting the limitations you mentioned with the rapid testing, I wonder to what extent the Ministry of Health and Wellness be in a position to facilitate this level of PCR testing for events, considering the challenges they had last year after the significant uptake. I think this is a question specifically as you're suggesting that we need to test more.
Well, thanks a lot for the question, Kareem. Yes, last year we did have quite a challenge when we had a significant influx of visitors to the country in terms of getting those tests back out in a timely manner. And yes, one would often say, well, if we can't get the test back in a timely manner, let's go for something that's only going to take 15 minutes. But there is a challenge with that, in that 15-minute test is not as sensitive because it does not amplify or make more copies of the virus. And so that is why the gold standard has been the PCR, and now we're seeing the advent of the rapid PCR coming on board. Certainly since that period where we had a significant delay in test results getting back, and I'm speaking from the hat of that, as I do not work with the Ministry of Health. I am only simply the first vice president of that. We have been meeting with the Ministry of Health really to try to get their testing protocols and the efficacy of the lab and the automation of the lab to be increased so that we do not have that same challenge again. And so we know that there's now a component of the lab that is partially automated, and certainly with the advent, as I said, of the rapid PCR test, we are hopeful that as we try to move towards not just for entertainment, but if we reopen our ports of entries, that we can certainly facilitate everyone. And I think that is the goal of everyone. But as we speak right now, we are not there yet. And I think that is probably the most important part. And I love what Andre said, because I think this is really now the time for everyone, not just the entertainment industry, doctors, teachers, everything, to take the opportunity to really reinnovate yourself and also to use your social capital, because entertainers have social capital like no one else. They have reach like no one else, and it's a perfect opportunity to get out there and to encourage persons to test, so that we can really get to see if we are up to par and if we can really handle really having increased testing numbers going to the lab before we even decide that we are going to reopen.
Thank you, Adana. I want to get Raj involved, and you came to mind immediately as we started to talk about May 8th. I mean, we've spoken about May 8th. I've been speaking to some colleagues in Canada, and they're having concerns of the challenge for them to get to herd immunity. We've heard of their challenges in terms of themselves getting vaccinated, which vaccines they're going to use. Oxford, AstraZeneca, Johnson's gone up bust. And so they're having an issue where they're trying to get the population vaccinated. But even I think they need to get to about between 20 and 40% vaccinated to get to herd immunity. And the fear is that there are so many anti-vaxxers out there that they fear that they cannot get to that sense of herd immunity. We do know that their borders are closed. They're not letting people in and out generally. But May 8th is our glory day that we're all working towards. And yourself, how we know you mostly from Copacabana, so you could talk about your other businesses too. How are they getting ready in terms for perhaps the restart of the tourist industry? What are your plans? What are your considerations? What models are you thinking to use?
So before I go into that, I want to ask what. So Adana has made a very valid point that we really have no idea of, because of the lack of enough testing, what our numbers really are. I think unless we're able to get those numbers actually understood, the science of what is our actual percentage, then I think only a conversation can happen about when can we have an event and how can we do it and what's the process. Is testing going to be something needed to for an event? Like, are we going to test everyone coming into the event? Is that even feasible? Is it even cost effective? So I'm trying to think about operationally, is it even possible? So then the whole chat about the vaccine passport, that also creates, as Adana said, a discrimination. You can't tell someone about, you can't come to this event because you have no vaccine. So until I think we address these things, we don't really know how we're actually going to operate an event, because COVID is still prevalent. It may spike again. We don't know our actual numbers or actual percentage. And so even though, say, the ports are going to open back up on May 8th, gathering of people is still a problem. And our whole industry is based on gathering of people. And so that's simple, as simple as that sounds, until we figure that out. I mean, I can give you 5 different plans of what I would do or what I think we should do, but it's already dependent on this information of where do we really stand with our numbers. I mean, I sat in some meetings where there was science done by UE on these new protocols on May 8th. There was a whole science behind it of your risk. You know, it's all about risk. What is the percentage of risk? And has anybody done the studies on event industry? You know the risk on arrivals of passengers who are vaccinated or non-vaccinated and economic quarantine. I mean, those numbers have been done and done and done, and hence you were able to make a decision and create protocols. Do we have that data on island to be able to figure out, to even get to the point where we create actual protocols to have an event? I think that is really, we're going to be still stuck at this point. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm very optimistic in the future. I believe that we have to re-innovate. I think on collaboration, you know, is the most important thing. After the first lockdown, a lot of artists who couldn't travel or any revenue, you know, I am fortunate to have a venue with sound and stage and open air and, you know, enough space to actually have enough people that can distance. So as opposed to rent a venue and collaborate and share in risk to hold an event. And so we all have to work together to try to bring back the industry, and collaboration is going to be key. And also technology, as Orlando said, he has the technology to be able to track people. You know, now back to what I believe it was Brian said, that funding. Okay, how are we going to get funding to even try to do an event? And then what if the event gets canceled? How are we protected? Now, this may sound a bit crazy, or it may not. It may sound stupid even, but at the end of the day, our customers are the ones that fund us, right? And if we have a good enough product, will they pre-order or pre-buy it? And if the event does not come off, they get their money back. And that is somewhat a form of crowdfunding. So say that we have an event that we want to hold, and it's going to, we do our costs, how much is it going to cost to sound, light, cost cap, all the other different things you need to hold an event, and say, okay, well, I need to sell this many tickets to have this event. I'm talking about after we have the event, which could be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, whenever we get to that point. Are we able to say, well, to the customer base, are you willing to prepay through a crowdfunding platform to attend an event? And if we get to our goal of enough tickets sold, we can have the event. and then your money is processed. If it's not, you get your money back. It's not necessarily that your money is taken, but it's held. So, Orlando, I guess my question to you, have you looked in to these kind of crowdfunding models? I mean, for example, on New Year's Eve, when we all had to cancel our parties, we had to give a whole bunch of refunds. And just the whole payment system makes it hard, not hard, but it's just time consuming. And also, if the customer has the faith to know that, hey, if I pay for this ticket or I pre-buy this ticket and the event cannot go off, my money is automatically going to go back to me without through some kind of payment system. So I'm trying to say, I'm giving this idea out there. We have to start thinking differently. And yes, we could try to seek funding or sponsorship, but people that fund us are our customers who come to our concerts, our shows, our parties, or events. So is that method something that we should be discussing?
I gotta jump in there, Raj. There is a number of different, because I'm also a member of the World International Ticketing Association. There's an insurance that I could say is one of the 5 steps that we have discussed at that level, where you take ticket insurance, just like you take an airline insurance, and that would secure your money if the event does not come off, one way or the other. The idea, a lot of different ideas are being shot around right now in the industry pertaining to securing, but also not only securing, but bringing back the confidence of the customer itself, that right. You are going to have these protocols in place that are needed for them to feel comfortable at the event. And not miss a broken record, but until we could actually sit down with the Ministry of Health and those people to figure out exactly how they're thinking, because it's not, we're working on science from North America. I heard on CNN today, they said less than 10% of the cases come from outdoor events, right? Over 90% of the cases come from indoor events, right? Those are things that our association sent out to our membership to allow them to know, okay, there's a better possibility of an outdoor event than indoor event. I heard the Prime Minister today talk about having drive-in cinema open again.
I heard about that, yeah.
Right? And where there's no more than 20 people are allowed to go to the concession stand at any time. During the first shutdown, we had we had people at the bar counters monitoring how many people actually go to the bar. So these are things that a discussion need to be have, because at the end of the day, is more than just us in the industry. I know Erica is here, and I really want to hear from what Erica have to say. But we have the artists, we have their families, right? And also agreeing with Dana is that I think that this industry is probably one of the most social media savvy industries in the entire world. Mm-hmm. In Canada, the government is actually using the top 100 festivals to get the message out.
Orlando, you're muted again.
I'm muted. Okay, yeah. There's a lot of things that we need to do and that we could do, but all it means that all the people need to be at the table. It can't be just one person making a decision, then going to ask questions, because we got a basic framework of what we are working with. But yes, to your question, is that they have insurance right now that we could insure tickets for events. So if you buy a ticket, you know that is insured. A costume, whatever you're buying, there's an insurance policy, but the customer got a choice if to opt in or opt out of the insurance, the same way that they have it when they do for airline ticket.
I think, Orlando, what you are speaking of is actually, and DiCarlo, I'm not saying that you have to do this, but you're essentially having a working meeting to actually come up with your kit, how you're going to function kit. Because everything I'm hearing from everyone here is exactly what you need to have, So I think that may be one of your next steps coming out of this is not kind of a working meeting where you work on what your events toolkit is going to be and how you're going to be able to roll out events, how people are going to be able to function, what you're going to be putting in place. And I think with that, that is what you would need to press the green light as soon as the okays are given wherever they are. Or if you lose them sometimes and you have to hit the restart button, at least you have the toolkit there on how to function. And from what I'm hearing, there are a lot of things that you have already, which is good news.
Yeah, we are taking notes. I really think that this is a think tank. It is indeed an open forum, and it is in fact a think tank because lots of people have ideas, but you know, a one-off idea may not be the strongest idea. So if we have a collective plan, we can move forward as a collective unit. You know, the old adage with the strength in numbers is, I think, what we're going forward with, because for a very long time, I think, you know, I've heard that such things have been done before, but I see COVID as a break point. And I think that's what's so interesting about this topic is that now that we have actually even lived through this year and through the changes is a great point where we are very reflective and we all each have at least one idea of what we can do and what needs to be done. I think if we can definitely collate all of those things, one, we're going to get that handbook that you recommended, but even as we engage I'll use the governmental entities because they are the entities that are leading in the country, but we can therefore go to them with a plan and not necessarily be looking at them for the plan, and therefore we would have a stronger position to go forward with. This takes me to Erica and ask as an industry partner, and even in what has foregone in the discussions, how do you see cost gap being a partner in maybe the redefining of the sector or helping in terms of the reopening of the sector? What can we perhaps be considered to be included from cost gap? Let me put it that way.
All right, so cost gap is here in two roles because obviously we license the events, but as I tried to make clear from the beginning, we're in it like everyone else. We're not in some special gilded position. We're in the same situation. And I can just put it on the table very clearly. We recognize that we have to work with our clients, and that is our intention. One of my staff members is here, and she would tell you we've been spending a lot of time looking and relooking our tariffs and trying to figure out how we will work with the different sectors. Admittedly, we don't have a position as far as live events are concerned, simply because we have been looking at this as premises or activities are given the green light. But I can give the assurance that we understand we have to work with our clients because we need them to do well for us to do well. Having said that, I think there's other than the health issues, there is, the conversation is revolving one, I think, around value and value preservation. And I'm wondering, and I'll segue into the whole digital event side of things, but I've concerns as far as my members are how will they be able to preserve their value as artists? Meaning they, you know, when you have faced over a year of hardship, you start to see increased competitiveness as everybody scrambles for whatever crumbs they are. And you see value being depressed, meaning people will take what they get. And that may be okay as a survival tactic, but you know, as we come out of this, I'm concerned that we would have seen a depression in rates and so on that we may take a very long time to recover from. The same thing with the producers and promoters of events. How do they maintain the value of their events? And you know, we talk about insurance and so on, but there are added costs. If you're going to have to do testing, all these are added costs and so on. So I think we need to figure out, well, okay, it will take time, but there's a value preservation question. It came up first, I think, with, I can't remember, but it came up early in the Jennifer. She touched on it, and it's been recurring. So I have a concern because even before COVID, for the past 20 years, I've seen, for example, in the advertising market, the very negative impact of that competitiveness and the pushing down of rates. So that when I first came into this business, the sort of rates artists and producers would earn, say, in the advertising market, plunged. And that's just from competing amongst one another. So I am keen to ensure there's a strategy so that once, whenever it is we quote unquote recover, that we don't find that in terms of how people are paid, not just artists, but you know, events, etc., how much you're able to generate, we haven't gone back, you know, a couple decades. And that leads me to the digital market. I don't know what sort of strategies the producers may have in mind, but you know, one of my concerns is the ability to get people to pay for online events. And we can target the diaspora wherever, but I still think the sort of pricing strategies is a challenge because people do not, Caribbean people do not like to pay for online events or online content, let's put it that way. So again, with this idea of value preservation in mind, you know, how do you transition from an event that may have had 3,000 people in person to maybe 300 people in person and some sort of reliance on an online audience, not to mention this, you know, people ask all the time for online licenses from us, and it's extremely complicated. And it is a difficult situation because the reality is under some circumstances, I cannot guarantee you that your event would not be blocked or portions of it would not be blocked. And it's as simple as when you use recorded music, international recorded music online, we can't clear that license. So there's always a risk when you go onto YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, the holders of the copyright in those recordings, if their algorithms pick you up, you know, they have the AI running all the time looking, they can have you blocked. And I had a call from a church recently because they were blocked, I think 2 or 3 times. And it's because those platforms are not licensed for the Caribbean. We are, as a regional body, engaging with them. It's a slow process, but even if we get some of the rates licensed, the record companies always license their rates directly. So it is really challenging where you're going to use recorded music. So if it's strictly live, we may be able to help you. And you're having sponsorship or monetization, you are advised in those situations to definitely go to the corporate organization. But it's not as simple as in the traditional environment where it could give certain guarantees. So bearing all of that in mind, my concern is how are we going to preserve value? You know, how do we all generate monies going forward in a meaningful manner? But we will work with our clients.
Thank you for that, Erica. My working with COSCAP academically, at least, I know you always give assistance in making sure that we sensitize our new students in arts and entertainment management in both programs. We thank you for that, and of course the work of Gail and the team there. So I am sure that you will be one of our first doors that we knock on as we try to develop partnerships and to be able to, again, present some level of activity. 1 minute, Andre. I just want to draw Orlando's attention, and I'm going to come back to him with that question and Adana questions in the chat. There's a discussion, Orlando, that you would have started as it pertains to insurance to events, and thank you for the questions, Terencia, and some of the information Peter is sharing there. So Orlando may want to shed more light on that. And Adana, we have a question from Jeff also about the testing and the exposure. So I'll let you all see those quickly, and then we'll go straight to Andre, and then we'll come back to Orlando and Adana and Jennifer. I'm coming to you next.
Thanks, DeCarlo. So just to add to what Erica was saying, we've been advising our clients to create new mixed business models. And because of the recorded music challenge, we have encouraged them to really look at live stream and live performances. And with the live stream, live performances, we're encouraging them to record those live performances and then use platforms like TuneCore, for example, to get the residual revenue from. Obviously, in person, we would have suggested to them that those numbers would definitely be reduced. But you may have to think of having driver matter experiences, for example, to get some of the numbers. But what is key is going to be crucial is understanding the market and where the placement is happening in terms of that value. Because if you understand that your market locally for the live in-person activity is going to be about 300, 400, 600 people, you know then that you need to also create a local digital audience as well for the sponsors to be attracted to the actual event. So for example, you have to work very hard on what your social media is going to be looking like, how you are doing promotions. Instead of having promotion times of maybe 6 weeks, you may have to look at promotion times of much longer to give the sponsor a longer engagement period. You may have to look at having influencers as part of that process in order to give the sponsors as a wide enough platform. So when you're data mining, you really have to think about where the sponsor's product is going to get the additional value, so that when you actually do make your pitch to them, they can actually see, okay, if I'm going to give you, probably used to give you 60,000 before, I can probably only give you 20,000, but I am getting this mileage for the 20,000. And then when you're thinking of the recorded live performance that you're going to stream using maybe like a TuneCore, TuneCore, you have to also consider the collection that's going to be there. Obviously, the royalties are paid through like a cost cap for writers and publishers, etc. But you, as the direct owner of the content, you get 100% of that right back into your hand. Well, once you pay an additional collections fee to TuneCore, they then give that to the authors and so on. So these are things that you have to think about in terms of planning your mixed business model for your product. And of course, I'm talking mainly about musical and maybe some theatrical performances in terms of events, not necessarily a fete or, you know, like a jump up kind of thing. But
I had a really good time in verses with Bounty and Beanie Man.
exactly.
I know it's not the same thing, but the
And
you know, it's the sponsorship perhaps helped
yeah.
necessarily set up that programming.
And they've made residuals from their YouTube and so on, which they couldn't before. And now TuneCore collects on Facebook, IG, and YouTube. So that's another opportunity for our sector. And with things like Republic Pay, locals who have accounts can get money back into their bank accounts within 48 hours. So it's not having to wait long like TicketPal and having to, all those things are now kind of ameliorated with some of the new things that are in existence. So just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. We have a fantastic discussion going on in the chat as it pertains to insurance, and we have discussed insurance and thought of insurance, but we also looked, I should assure Terencia that we did, and it did come up in the discussion, the whole idea of risk management. It is not something that has come to the fore until very lately. You know, most contracts having a force majeure, we just expect a little rain shower and the place will dry over and we'll have the show 2 days later. Now we're having an extensive consideration of what risk management for events will necessarily look like and what are the considerations. Orlando, you had brought up this discussion, which sparked this other discussion. Unmute your mic. Unmute your mic.
It's nothing new, basically. I remembered in 2013, I did the Air Supply Tour the World Chronic Show in Turks and Caicos, and they had a thunderstorm, and with 18,000 people, after 15 minutes, the show had to be canceled. So there's two different types of insurance that we're talking about here. There is event insurance, which secures in case the event have to cancel for some act of God, right? And then there's ticket insurance, where you're securing your payment to the event. So there are a number of different insurances where it comes to events. I think a couple of years, I was not in Barbados yet when Reggae Fest had to cancel. I moved the date. If they had insurance, the payout would have been a lot, but there are not many companies across the world that actually do event insurance. So I think the last time I did event insurance, it was with Lloyd's of London. So as I would say, for events, there is ticketing, there is patron insurance, which part most of us take, but there's also the risk insurance, which is if anything happens that force the event to have to cancel the event. So as I think somebody pop up, there's 3 types of insurance that you're looking at when you event. But once again, as Erica and the others said, that increased the cost of production. In some countries, they're even paying for the addition, which it did after 9/11 also. None of the major festivals in Europe were given additional money for extra security services. So this is nothing new. It's just that because of the circumstance, we have to see what we can get and what we are allowed to do. So if we need extra security hands or extra scanners or extra cleaners or so forth, is there any assistance for taking it to the next level? Or would that increase the price of entry to event?
Okay, I see Terencia pop up on my screen. Do you want to add anything more to the discussion from your other know-how, Terencia?
My insurance hat.
Yes, please.
My questions really were from the standpoint that I don't believe that anyone is offering event insurance at the level to which Orlando speaks in terms of ticket reimbursement in the event that the event has to be canceled, or even if an event has to be canceled by an act of God. The only thing that is offered to any event is liability cover.
Mm-hmm.
And that is it. It is not, and I made the comment that I haven't heard a single company speak to having a desire to find a risk tool that will protect events and promoters and that kind of stuff. Not a single company has spoken to that. Is it something that is absolutely necessary now? I believe that it is, because we're going to need all hands on deck to get all industries back up and running, even even as it relates to making sure that there's adequate entertainment in the hotels and that kind of stuff. But in terms of the persons who are charged with creating products that will secure those risks, the discussion has not been had. Because then you have to create a product, the FSC has to approve the product. First, they have to pretty much, the actuary will have to decide, is this really a product that we can afford to carry on our books? Does it make sense? The reinsurers internationally will have to say, yes, they are willing to back the product, because that's going to be a general insurance product. That's not going to be a life insurance product. It's going to be a general insurance product. So you now have to bring reinsurers who will have to come in to say, we are going to back this product. And then the insurance company will say, well, fine, we can create the product, and we're going to go forward in terms of promoting it, marketing it, and all that kind of stuff, because it's going to have costs on their end as well. So they need to determine, is this something that we really want to go after? So I'm just saying, not that it's not necessary, but I'm just saying that I don't think that any company, any of the three companies, which would be in the regional sense, which would be Sagicor, which will be Guardian Life, and which would be Pan American Life. Those are the three regional entities. So I haven't heard a discussion of that sort.
Okay.
She's totally correct. That way said that we did not do it. Right now, Ticketmaster have it. We are going to be launching it as soon as we reopen. And it was offered to us from international company, not original company.
Correct. So you would have done it through Lloyd's, correct?
Correct. That's what I'm saying. Right. We did it through Lloyd's. So what I'm saying is that it is available. It's necessary because, as I said before, because of my association with the International Ticketing Association, that is things that we looked at to gain the confidence of the buyers. So and Ticketmaster had this for years. Ticketmaster actually do a self-insurance, which is $2.99 US for years. A self-insurance. So they create their own insurance on it. So you're totally correct. There's nothing available in our marketplace at present.
Okay. Thank you, Terencia, for that. It is definitely something that we should consider. It is a futuristic thing. As Jen was saying, most people just get public liability, and yes, thanks to Kerry Allen and his team at Preferred Insurance Brokers, they tend to assist in brokering that on many events' behalf as their sponsorship to events. So public liability insurance is like the A of insurance so far. But again, as we have gone through this experience, it means that we must look and see what the international standards are. And is it a case, can I ask, that even out of those three agencies, as a lobbying agency, could we lobby? Or is it something that you're suggesting that we would need to necessarily find agencies similar to ourselves throughout the Caribbean to help lobby insurance companies to consider taking on that?
I would think that it's something that you would have to pair with other agencies throughout the region to actually have the insurance, to draw the insurance company's attention. Obviously, internationally, it's going to happen at the drop of a hat when you consider the volume of persons attending a concert internationally, do we get to those numbers regionally? You know, so it's always going to be a question of numbers. Is it a viable product? Because I don't think that there would be a challenge getting the product created, but the question is always going to ask, is it a viable product? Do we have that level of events happening within the region to say that it is something that is sustainable and not just seasonal?
I think sustainability is the actual word there, because we did attempt to get the artists on our artist registry into one kind of a plan, but the challenge was that many of them, as Terencia said, function maybe seasonally. Sometimes they only produce every 3 years, and so on. So you have to understand, as I'm saying, as an agency, what you may be able to advocate for is, or to demonstrate. Maybe I see Dr. Tullis here. You may want to use her services in terms of mapping as the agency how you function. So for example, you know that one event promoter may be producing 5 events in a year, 6 in a year, 10 in a year. Someone may be doing 2 or just 1 a year, but then you can grade or rate that particular person. But collectively, as a body, you may be producing up to 60 events a year. And as a result of that, as an agency, you may be able to access some of these instruments, or they may be able to create instruments for it. It means that all of the players have to become members of your agency. They have to see themselves as active members and not just come in maybe once every 2 years or so on. They have to see that in other words, you don't want the association, DeCarla, to be one that is just a naming association. That's association of people who are in this sector, but association of people who are working and functioning in the sector, and they want to be able to benefit from it. They want to see you as a lobbying body. They want to see you as the body who can help them with these things in relation to insurance. They want to see you as the body that can represent Barbados internationally. So for example, as a government body, we may not be able to get funding, or we may be absent from funding, but as a private entity, you may be able to access international financing and funding. So yeah.
Okay, Peter, Lewis had his hand up. Peter?
Hey, good evening, folks. The card I just wanted to continue to raise this question of the insurance. Not only in terms of the COVID, but generally in terms of our industry overall. I take the points, for example, that Andre and Terencia are making, but I still feel like the volume of work that's done during the festivals, I think, and the numbers that at the events at these festivals may provide for us a space for lobbying, insurance companies, regionally. We may have regional instruments, for example, that can work across the region, across festivals and across carnivals. Those are the things that I'm interested a little more in hearing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you to on our long-term agenda. Yes, Erica has her hand up.
It was going back to Orlando. He said he got insurance. This is for tickets, Orlando, and if so, without disclosing your private business, I wanted to understand the implication on pricing that may have.
It was for ticketing basically, and there's no secret. If you go to buy a ticket on Ticketmaster right now, they charge you I think it's either $295 or $299 per ticket, and that is US. So it serves as an insurance policy that if you are sick, if the event get canceled. Just a small example, we did Nicki Minaj after party in Montreal, and Nicki Minaj said her ad said that she come out and party with her. We sold 4,000 tickets. She went into her VIP lounge and stood there for the whole entire night and would not come out and party with the people. They videotaped it and sent it back. And because of the insurance policy that people had, they all got back their money because of the breach of contract on that behalf. So that was one, that was based on the ticketing that they paid for the insurance with. But we have not made it available for events in the Caribbean because of fear of people feeling that you're driving up the price of services, more or less.
So it would be $6 plus VAT?
No, it is yeah, well, that is what they were charging. We were charging less than that.
And so the cost is totally the consumers. It's passed on completely.
Totally passed on the consumers. It's similar if you go and buy an airline ticket on Expedia or Liat. They ask you if you want the insurance. It's 12 something for the insurance on Liat.
Okay, well, maybe that could work, but I know I've in terms of the event, there's a risk. I've asked a major, one of our bigger promoters here, who've had the challenge of events being canceled because of weather and so on, and he told me, you know, it's too expensive. And I thought it was a little odd because I thought it was more expensive, the risk of the event being canceled. And, you know, they've been in business for many years, but he told me, you know, it's too expensive and they would rather just not do it. So,
yeah, if you're doing event insurance, as I know the circumstances you're talking about, I also spoke to them about it. As Terencia said, there are not too many companies that do it. And I have recommended a company, but that was out of Europe again, that do it, but it is based on your percentage of your revenues.
Okay.
And it will be and the VAT will be included in this also?
Nope.
Okay. Adana had her hand up. Adana?
Hi, DeCarla. Just wanted to answer. I think you had sent me a question.
Yes, Jeff.
Yeah. Jeff really wanted to know if there's really some magic number that we could use as opposed, because he did make a very good question. You know, if you get tested today, you know your status up until that day. That's absolutely correct. And then certainly, what happens the next day? If you go out, you happen to get exposed, potentially you don't know, because you obviously can't see the virus. But what is the magic number, and do we always have to do mass testing? If I've understood him correctly by what he's asking, and to be quite honest with you, in science, it's all based on statistics. You know, there's really no shortcut to getting this done. And I think that is quite important. I even heard early in the dialogue, I actually can't remember who brought it up, the discussion about herd immunity. And herd immunity is something quite important. But when we think about herd immunity, especially in the context of COVID, we're talking about a 60 to 70% coverage of our population being vaccinated. Now let's put that into a bit of context, because we have close to 300 persons in Barbados, living in Barbados, and about a third of our population is less than 19 years old. I actually just looked it up, and that was according to UNICEF 2016 data, where we got roughly 100,000 persons. So if we're trying to get about our 60 to 70% mark, we're actually aiming very close to 100% of our population that would need to be vaccinated. And we already know that at this point in time, we're not even there yet. Recently, the last set of data that came out stated that we only had about 20% of our population being partially vaccinated. Luckily, we're now moving into our second wave of vaccination. So I think that as Andre kept harping on, and I'm very happy he did, and he's a good public health supporter. But it's really to put the measures in place to ensure that you use your social collateral really to get the information out there and really to educate the public, because as I said before, you guys have the most reach. Also, I know that there's an urge to get back out and actually undertake events and stuff like that. But in addition to knowing, and I think that this is the most important point, we started to discuss it even with insurance and understanding what is happening in our population, understanding, for instance, how people move, how people social distance, population densities, in terms of the amount of time that person spend in close proximity to others. All of that is very, very pertinent data that would essentially act as triggers to either lock down tighter or relax measures. Similarly with our testing, right now, we don't have as much research as we would need in this space to not just know, is it SARS-CoV-2? Because we no longer have SARS-CoV-2, just the wild type of SARS-CoV-2. We have thousands of variants. So there's now the push for things like genomic surveillance, which we really need to do. And how does this virus really affect our population? Yes, we could sit down and we can look at data from the UK and the US and all these external populations, but until we really understand what's happening here in Barbados, how this virus affects us, how our vaccine, the efficacy of our vaccine, then until we have that data, then we can't really make very solid decisions in terms of how we move forward. And that's really where the science is.
Adana, in segueing from what you were saying, the type of events that I was thinking about in terms of a bubble type event and creating bubbles even within events is something that I was thinking about as a possibility. But if the industry opens up and we are allowed to do events again, where the event that we would have done together with Orlando and DeCarla, where it was a drive-in type event, but it was, it was segmented in groups. And even for smaller events, even if they were to open back up at that 300 number, which we were at last year, that the concept that I had in mind to doing an event like that was to sell packages in groups, so that even if something happens, is within a closed circuit of people. Policing is another thing that I wanted to bring up in terms of reopening the industry. Not necessarily police, but policing events to ensure that the social distancing continues to happen. I know last year we would have fell down a little bit in the industry in terms of we were kind of we did as much as we could and that we were asked to do in terms of putting on events. We had all the sanitizing going on, temperature checks, and so on, and trying to keep people socially distanced. Most events were even doing bottle service where persons wouldn't have to congregate at bars and so on and so forth. So a lot of that was done. But I think in terms of reopening now in the environment we're in now is a little different to last year in terms of us having to follow through now at the actual event to ensure that a lot more things are done at the events. Because I take your point that you made earlier about opening, then to close, and then have another lockdown for another long period, that it will do more damage to have that happening than for us to open and really think about how, if this whole discussion we're having here tonight is about opening to do events, right? I believe we have to actually look at the type of events we want to put on and then how we are going to execute these events. I mean, for them to be safe and as safe as possible, because we can do all the talking here, but then when a man pay and get his ticket swiped or scan at the door and he get in the fact and he see a Dana out there walking up by herself and he decide he can cross by a Dana, walk up with a Dana, then who's stopping he from doing that, right? So all this talk we talking, it can come down to policing events. And if we have to look at a bubble where people go into a segmented bubble where they're tested, we know these people good. It may seem far-fetched, but the sporting events, for instance, like I watched NBA last year, those guys were in a bubble for how long? 3 months. Not saying that I can put somebody in 3 months to effect, but they were in a closed circuit where you know, they were getting tested continually and they weren't exposed to anybody on the outside. And my thinking about Kadooment, you know, in terms of the bans, that is something that we would like to attempt if we are given that opportunity, where we have a closed circuit, we can do rapid testing that you said, Adana, where
No,
we can
I didn't say rapid testing, not rapid testing. No, this is
antigen
rapid
test,
PCR.
but PCR, PCR, let me be medically correct.
Yes, be
Okay.
specific.
PCR rapid
You
testing,
learned.
right? PCR rapid testing. She gave me a little bit of education already, Andre. So if that is set up where people can be tested, get their results back in a fast time, and I don't know what kind of quarantining they can do before the event, but that's the only way I can see maybe a Kadooment type event happening, right? And you know, I'm not sure how else it will work in this environment if we can't be sure the status of people that are participating.
Well, Brian, I want to say a few things. One, we have seen numerous examples, both locally and internationally, where small groups cause big problems. That's the first thing, right? It does not require a large group to cause a big problem, right? We have seen very, very tiny groups, even up to quite recently, causing some huge problems here, right? But more importantly, I think as you start to even begin to consider possibly having the concept of the bubble, because the bubble has been something that has been touted, as you correctly said, NBA, NFL, even cricket, okay, they have used the whole bubble concept. But as you use an additional group entity coming into that space, because you're not just talking now about the players, you're also now talking about your patrons. And as you quite nicely pointed out, when things like substances get on board, it's quite difficult to control a person and ask them always to make the most rational and appropriate decisions. Also, you have to balance economics. What is going to be the cost? Can you realistically expect that government will cover that cost for both locals and travelers? And that is not a very realistic expectation. And then also, certainly, do you think that necessarily they will opt for the additional cost? Because how many tests will you run within that period that you have a bubble? Because you're going to have to keep them in a very localized space, right? Testing and retesting quite often to ensure that you keep persons safe. And most importantly, what measures or what framework would you have in place should those people, if anyone, become positive, in terms of how you get them out of that space and how do you take care of them? So I'm not so sure that the bubble concept would work quite well, although there's consideration for it. But the bubble concept will work quite well for persons who are not just the entertainers, because there's a difference between you having bubble concept for persons who are providing a digital experience, right, versus having a bubble experience for a group of patrons who might decide, you know what, I see a Dano over the side of the street and I'm leaving where I am and I'm going into that area. How much policing can you realistically expect in an event, especially when you have substances on board? And I'm not so sure that probably would be the best model in terms of the bubble. But I mean, this is a very quickly evolving space, and I will go back to say the only way that we can make the best possible decisions is by having the fundamental research data to guide how we operate, and we don't have it. We don't have it. We don't have enough numbers for our testing. We don't have the genomic sequencing here on the island. We don't even have the numbers for persons that are being vaccinated. And we're doing a very good job here vaccinating persons on the island, but we're still at a mere 20%. So we still have some ways to go.
Erica has to leave, and we are winding down. So I'd like to thank her for joining in the discussion, and we will be speaking with her and her COSCAT team, I think, as we devise a way forward. So at this point, she'll be leaving, and we'd just like to thank her. 1 minute, Joanne. Jennifer, coming out even of that discussion, I know that Dance in Africa is still doing things out there. What are you doing? What is your experience still being out there as a troupe? I know when people think of of entertainers and entertainment, they're always going to go to the vocal performers. But I know that, well, Dance in Africa, of course, is an artistic troupe, and as I tell persons, we meet Dance in Africa, we don't even know we have met Dance in Africa. They back performers, they're models for us in masquerade bands. There are other cultural ambassadors. So even as you are still operating out there, what are you doing to secure your students, your school, and what has been your experience as the choreographer going out there into the marketplace and mixing with actual patrons? And as I said, we talked about insurance and security, health and safety, and I know you're very keen on that topic.
Yeah. Well, I just say that there are three components that we are really concerned about. The fact that we are teaching, the fact that we are creating, and we are also entertaining. Those are three things. And therefore, with these three things, especially teaching and entertaining, there are very serious protocols there. We had been in lockdown, so our classes moved from face-to-face to online. And online meant that we would not have had as many people as we would face-to-face because children were grappling with school, and there's a certain amount of time that you want a child to be actually on the screen. So whereas, say, for example, our junior company may have been exposed to 5 classes a week, we narrowed that down to 2 because they were at school. So we are preparing to go back out, and it's interesting because Andre is talking about a handbook, and what would that handbook look like? A handbook that we would use within our teaching spaces, but also a handbook that we would use for entertainment. And we have been out. We were out when things were not very bad. I remember performing at Christmas, and I insisted that our children walk into the space just before we were in a hotel, or a popular hotel, maybe a 5-star hotel. Walking through the lobby and those places, you wore your mask. But right when you got on the stage itself, and that particular hotel with children, because our children were performing, we were a good distance from their guests. So the children were able, very much in choreographic style, and they all wore the same type mask. They were able to take off the mask, place it on the right hand, and when they were exiting stage, choreographically, the mask went back on. We are in a space now where we are using a mask on stage. We are preparing for virtual for BWU, for May Day, and our dancers now back out just on a very small scale. Rather than have a virtual rehearsal, we are having a face-to-face rehearsal, and they are asked to wear their mask. So I am sitting there, I'm policing. As soon as the mask comes down, back up, cover your nostrils. There are water breaks in which you can wash your hands and so on. So it is not the easiest of climates. The biggest error, the problem that I always foresee, we speak of entertainers going into space, but there must be protocols, especially for the traveling public. In other words, our tourists. Our tourists are probably coming from spaces where they do not understand the term social distance. So I find very often they do not give the performers, the entertainers, the room that they really deserve on the space. We are no longer interacting. So Mother Sally will not interact. The limbo dancer will not interact. So we need that comfortable distance. And sometimes I wonder if our agencies or companies or hotels, what is the relationship with the guests, that it doesn't always look as though that is seriously enforced. That these, I remember, and I say we went out to a government sponsored performance, and we were told that the young people, our dancers, would have to move through the audience and the guests wear masks. So my question was, what about them? Will they be asked as forcefully as we are being asked to wear their masks. And what's our dancers got on? It was so horrible. I mean, the dancers didn't wear masks for that, and the guests were all over them. I was extremely scared. And so I thought that there were protocols, additional protocols I would have to put in place. So, Andre, I'm interested in handbooks, and if there will be workshops for the creation of these handbooks for various purposes. I'm interested in our protocols for our audiences indoors and outdoors, especially the traveling audiences. I am also interested in lobbying for adequate spaces in our hotels or wherever else we go to perform, that if we are thinking about social and physical distancing, then our spaces for the entertainer. An entertainer may decide I will come from home already in my costume or whatever I'm going to wear. If you are operating with a production, it may be difficult, especially when you have got to change from one scene to another, from one dance to another, that calls for costume change. Are there adequate spaces? Is there enough space considering the number of performers that you are dealing with? The price structure, again, to accommodate those who have suffered great fallout and who want to come back now with proper fees. And those are some of the things that I actually think about. So for me, it's the classroom. For me, it is also our entertainment, what that looks like.
Right. And then you had a question, just minute, Andre. But you also had a question to Adana to explain the difference between the tests, rapid PCR and the rapid antigen.
And the rapid tests.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm happy to explain that question. So generally speaking, the SARS-CoV-2 virus takes lodging in the back of the nose, what we call in medical terms the nasopharynx. And from there, it can then enter the respiratory tract, go down to the lungs. These two tests primarily use the sampling of the nasopharynx, the back of the nose, to get your sample. That sample is taken and is essentially placed in a solution that will either have to undergo robust manipulation to get a result, or it can be dropped onto almost what looks like a pregnancy test. Okay, this pregnancy test is just looking at what is present without any sort of amplification, without trying to get what is in the background. So it really requires that a good amount of the virus is present at the time on the sample, and your result is as always as good as your sample. If you haven't taken a good sample, you won't get a good result. That's the first thing. But the rapid test is simply going to place it on that cartridge, and this is the rapid antigen test, within essentially 15 minutes to 30 minutes, and you're going to get a result. Now, most of these tests are considered to be highly sensitive and specific once the person has what we call a cycle threshold of less than 33. What does that mean in non-medical terms? A highly infectious person, some person who most likely will be symptomatic. And so the rapid antigen test is primarily and mostly recommended for persons who are symptomatic. Now, there is a challenge with the rapid antigen test because it is not amplifying the sample, in that you can get a person who may even be symptomatic who may still test negative. And that is simply because you have not gotten enough sample. Whereas the PCR test, because before we could get to the rapid PCR, we got to do the PCR. The PCR test is actually taking that sample and you're putting it through multiple, what we call polymerase chain reactions, or multiple heating and cooling, where you are amplifying what you have there. So if, let's say, initially we had 2 bananas, at the end of those multiple heating and cooling cycles, we have 20 bananas. And the instrument is essentially looking to see how many heating and cooling cycles it would take for us to get a signal that would say this is positive. Now, obviously, if a person has lots of virus within their sample, they're going to require to undergo less cycles in order to get a positive signal. Whereas someone who really isn't positive would go through the entire cycle for the protocol and still wouldn't get a positive result. And so that is why the PCR test is really considered the gold standard. It is very, very sensitive. And if there's anything in the background, it will pick it up. The rapid PCR test is simply looking at that same mechanism in a lot shorter time period. So it's really a point of care testing modality where you essentially collect the sample, you put the sample, the tube, everything into the instrument, and the machine deals with everything for you. It does not require someone pipetting some of the sample from here and putting it in an Eppendorf tube and putting it onto the instrument and running a plate, and doesn't have all those steps. So essentially you're getting the sensitivity because you're still amplifying the sample, but the runtime is a lot shorter. And that is why I know a lot of persons are very motivated, even for instance, in the setting of workplaces. And they had a study quite recently where they looked at nursing homes, where persons were essentially testing nursing home, not only the residents, but also the staff, to see, using the rapid antigen test, to see if they could catch any positive persons. And it failed miserably. And it's simply because the rapid antigen test is really not for an asymptomatic population, because you're going to miss persons. And that's what you get with what we call a false negative, which is something that you would constantly hear doctors warn you about. If you get a rapid antigen test and it is negative, it does not necessarily mean you are truly negative. And so we would, especially if you're symptomatic, we will generally follow up with a PCR test to then confirm that there's nothing, no small amounts, trace amounts in the background that will then give a positive result. Because we want to make sure that not only do we catch a positive person early, not simply to remove them out of circulation, but also to provide them with the care that they need.
Thank you, Adana. Andre, and then Joanne and Stephen.
Jennifer, as it relates to the handbook, you say handbook, I say toolkit, same thing. We would have started this discussion last year through a program we had with the Caribbean Development Bank. And we are in the process now of rolling out a training session for players in the festival and tourism market, where we actually will be able to look at what this toolkit would look like. Now, from a business development perspective, I know what it would look like. From the discussions we're having today, I know what your toolkit could look like. So we at the NCF are available to assist you in terms of what you would want that toolkit to look like. But from a national and regional perspective, that process, we're working with CDB to roll that out. I think they're about to make the call for the consultant to initiate it. But it's something that across the region we're all concerned with. But I think, normally Barbados, Trinidad, and Jamaica people tend to look to us for the models to go by. But as I said, we're available to assist.
We'd be very pleased to, as an organized collective, to consider ourselves to be part of that when that discussion starts. I would like to invite Dr. Tull to the discussion. Sorry, Joanne, you can go right ahead.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I hope everyone is well and keeping safe. Just wanted to make a comment, really. Just adding on food for thought to what Adana would have responded to Brian's suggestion in terms of the bubble and what have you. Also to be considered with regard to vaccination and the festival context. The data seems to be suggesting that the young demographic are not so inclined to be vaccinated. And we must be mindful that that young demographic that is not so inclined is a significant portion of our festival or carnival tourist market. So that when I think about those two things juxtaposed there, my feeling is that as we contemplate the way forward, we may find it useful to be looking not only at our own data, but to put, where possible, the medical and medical related data in terms of behaviors, behavioral trends and patterns with regard to vaccination and what have you, so that we could arrive at what would be more realistic and perhaps more effective measures for us that would allow for the sector to get back on its feet. Um, in a sense, when you think about it, we, in a way, kind of operating in vacuum. So there is what the medicine says, and that's on that side. And then, we are aware of our patterns of behavior in terms of how our market always behave. But these little nuances will help to make a difference in terms of what we may want to push forward. And even, Andre, in terms of the handbook, it would make no sense for things to be in a handbook that are wish lists, but rather things that are not just practical, but very much are based on data and very much based on what that data says likely to be the behavior of persons. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tull. And a quick question, is the Creative Arts Center at St. Augustine, have they started researching into, I guess, the COVID phenomena and how it has affected the Caribbean Festival marketplace?
Well, I suppose in a sense we have, if that we being the CFA, being me as a member of the faculty last year, I would have done a study very early on looking at the impact of COVID on the festival economy across the region. It's there, the data is there. I would have presented the data as well very early on. Um, at I believe that would have been an ICS Mona um, conference, so to speak. Um, I can't say if other colleagues are working on it in that regard, but I know that across the university there are one or two others that are looking at COVID, certainly in terms of how it would impact on consumerism. One of the things that we also have to be mindful of, certainly I as a social scientist, is that as much as this might sound very whimsical to say, this is all new for us. And it being new, it hints at the dynamic nature. It's like almost every week something different can possibly occur. And if one is collecting data, that can certainly throw off the data just like that. So that one of the things we need to look at, I think, would be to be very patient in terms of as we are collecting and look for trends. And in spotting trends, and this is where media and even this conversation, I was happy to come in here and listen. It gives a hint as to people's thoughts, intents, and that becomes very critical for us in the entertainment and the festival industry. And we can't deny that because we know in the past this is partly how we made money. We were always able to make people feel good, and we always knew what buttons to press to get them to spend their money to feel good. So in a sense, that being our advantage, I think we need to look towards that capacity in trying to understand those pitfalls that may lie ahead as we try to carve what may realistically be our future. I would also say, just in case I'm asked,
Oh no, Joanne, you've gone on mute.
sorry,
Okay.
I was saying I would say straight up, I'm not one for total digitalization, virtual with regard to the festival economy, because I think my work has shown that it benefits tremendously right across our sociocultural ecosystem. So that in my mind frame, it has to be something that would allow for some kind of balance, but at the same time where the door remains open for the gradual return whenever that could be allowed. But certainly it encourages us to really contemplate innovative ways of getting there. So I'll stop there for now. Thanks very much for
But
giving
thank
me
you
the
very
time.
much. It's good to see you here, and I hope you are doing well.
Trying to be, trying
There
to
you
keep
go.
it.
Please
Thank you.
be safe.
Thank you.
Stephen, you'll be the last man on the floor. How many parties have you been at, and that meant something completely
And then that meant something completely different. Right. So I was actually making some notes so I can be as concise as possible. First of all, Brian had mentioned the concept of bubbles and parties. You know, one of the reasons why even before government pulled the plug on All Year's Night events, there were a number of producers who canceled their events. And for the simple reason that the promoter was being held accountable and liable for the behavior of their patrons. And they recognized immediately, it didn't take any time whatsoever, they recognized immediately this will not work. We have absolutely zero control over what a patron decides to do once they're in there, and even if they have not yet had their first drink. There are patrons who walk through the door and they have a definite idea how they are going to behave at this event, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you can't prevent that person from coming in because you suspect. And if you let them come in and they do something, then you, A, are liable for the fines, and B, are liable for your event being shut down, and C, none of your patrons have ticket insurance, and D, your event itself does not have event insurance, and you are cruising for a bruising if you allow that to happen. So rather than take that risk, and if you, TC was talking about risk assessment, that was a very, very simple one. Immediately you decide this risk is way too large for me to let 250 people have a good time. Event cancel. The end. If anybody bought tickets yet, get them back the money. So that's going to be the challenge anytime we think about doing that type of an event. Now, Jennifer had mentioned audience behavior when her dancers were at an event. And I would have to say, during December, when we were allowed up to 250 persons at a 3-foot spacing, we at the Frank Cullimore Hall had 4 events over the course of that month. Maximum occupancy, 250. Social distancing within the venue, 3 feet or sometimes more, which meant that within the hall itself, I had to leave out a seat between each patron, and I had to ensure that the row in front and behind was staggered by a seat. So basically a checkerboard pattern throughout the hall. And which kind of ties back into the audience behavior. I had patrons who turned up as couples, adamant that they are from the same household, so they should be able to sit next to each other. Now, in the context of the hall, if I allow a couple to sit next to each other, you are not only going to throw off that row, you're going to throw off the rows in front and behind you all the way to the front and the back of the space. And this is something that we have already sat down and planned and plotted in the space. It took me as the manager to go to several patrons at the first couple of those shows and physically say to them, no, you cannot sit next to each other. Y'all will skip the seat between you. And if you don't want to do that, you are free to leave and allow the rest of us to continue to enjoy the event. No, I should not have to do that, right? I should not have to do that. But it just goes to show that our patrons are going to be one of our biggest challenges when it comes to any of these protocols that are put in place. And my third point ties on from that as well, to say that our patrons, ourselves, and our public need to realize that the guidelines and protocols that are put in place by government, by health, and by the science, that they are guidelines and not targets. And people don't seem to understand the difference between the two, that a guideline is not a target. Because your space can accommodate 100 people, and governments say that you can put 100 people in your space, does not mean that you have to try to put 100 people in the space. And you know that some people don't come, so you can sell 110 tickets. We hope that the 10 that don't come, the 10 that do come, and you will get your 100 people because you're gonna meet that 100-person target. You don't have to meet that 100-person target. Your space, government allows 100 persons in space, but yes, you can do 50 and do 50 even safer. I think producers and everybody, and this is across the entertainment sector, really then has to sit down and look at how do we formulate our events, cost our events, price our events, and pitch our events for sponsorship, such that within the parameters with which you're allowed, the entertainment event can make sense. That is right now, it is a very, very difficult thing. I am dealing with a venue which has pretty much fixed costs. There's not a lot of room for management. People say, well, yeah, you could only put, so you got to reduce your cost to half. But if 10 people in there or 500 people in there, the costs remain the same.
Yeah.
All the lights got to turn on, all the air conditioning got to run, you know, so the costs are pretty much fixed. So what has to happen is either the ticket price has to increase, the sponsorship has to increase, something has to pay for it, something, or the promoter has to decide that my profit margin is now not 75%, but it is now 30. So whatever mathematics you need to do, or not mathematics, whatever arithmetic you need to do to come up with how this is going to work within the context, within the parameters that are set, we have to do that. And if that answer is it won't work, well then that is the answer. But you can't just sit back, throw your hands in the air and say, but this would never work. You have to sit down and work it out and decide, will this work? Jennifer has done that. She has said, you know, this will work if I choreograph the mask wearing into the routine. Go into the environment, audience don't behave right. You go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, we will do it, but audience interaction will not happen. If you want my troupe, this is how it has to work. So you have to pivot, you have to reimagine what it is that you're going to do in order to make your event, your production, your talent work. Even at the hall, I know that even if an entity, let's say the youth orchestra, wanted to do an event in the hall and said, we are willing to do this event for 200 patrons, that I have to tell them, I'm sorry that you can't come. And it has nothing to do with the patrons at this point. It has to do with the fact that I simply cannot accommodate 125 people in my backstage areas and indeed on stage. So I would have to tell them, no, break your group down. I had this very same discussion with somebody who wanted to sponsor an event and they're like that. That group has to be broken down so that I have no more than 30 performers within the space. The backstage has to be able to accommodate them, and the stage itself has to be able to accommodate them at the protocols within the protocols that have been set out. You know, and as I said, those protocols and guidelines are not targets. We're not trying to, you know, hit the limit every single time. And it is going to be a rough time for all of us, but it is going to take, we do not waste the good crisis. As I say, sit down, pull out your spreadsheets, your piece of paper, you know, work on your own handbook, your own set of guidelines that work for you within your aspect of the industry, and see if it is viable for you to continue, if it's viable for you to pivot, or if it's viable for you to say, you know, until such time as I can be happy-go-lucky and do as before, I will have to hold on, sit down, find something else to do. You know, and unfortunately, or fortunately enough, because I think that a lot of promoters and entertainers and event specialists are going to come out of this on the other end with a very, very much more informed and enlightened appreciation for safe entertainment events. That is unbelievably undeniably what is going to happen. But we all have to understand that it is impossible for a government to give us the roadmap. We have to take the atlas and find our path. And that's
Agreed, Stephen. I think that's a fantastic segue. I should let everyone know that Stephen will be the moderator of next week's session. I should have stopped him before because I felt that he started to give away a lot of the chapter that we for next Thursday, and he'll be looking. The entire topic will be navigating the business of meetings, conference, and events in the post-COVID world. So I think he has started to open up that discussion. And let me tell you something: Stephen does not do paper. So when he just said about putting out paper to create your new blueprints as such, I knew that this was indeed a serious matter, and we should take note from his advice. We are closing. We're coming to a close now. But Dr. Patel wanted to make one more comment, and then we'll make the closing comments and bring this session to a close. Dr. Tull?
Thank you. I won't stay long. I am cognizant of the time, but it's funny enough that Stephen just gave an example of what I was just saying there. So I wanted to connect it. So Stephen was just talking about separating persons coming from the same home. So this is what I'm talking about. We know our culture. We know how our entertainment industry is. We know how our patrons are. So, for example, here in Trinidad and Tobago, patrons were made aware as to how the seating would be. And when you bought your tickets, if you went to buy for a group of four, those four sat together and then there was a space. So the seating was done according to how the tickets were purchased because they knew this is culture. This maybe my fellow Bajans have changed, but certainly here, if they were not allowed to sit together, they would not attend the event. It would have had a lot of confusion. And of course, in this instance, though, it was a soca event because this was Lyrical's concert. Um, in these instances, the promoters all had accepted that you are not making that money that you are accustomed to. But what came to mind as well as he was talking, as I heard other persons in the discussion raise the point about sponsorship. Yes, sponsorship really did play a big role. So that I believe when we look to our future, I think we have to recognize that it's all really coming on board and it's all for the common good, so to speak. Our challenge may lie with convincing our corporate entities that this is really all about a common good, um, and that they can possibly give. I know they're gonna say they don't have money, but we know we also have some regional entities across. For example, Digicel has played a very major role here where that is concerned. And I do agree though with Stephen about getting out that atlas and forging the way because they don't know, but we know our business. And so I think this really gives opportunity for us to really use our expertise in the various capacities from which we come and really set out how we can do this in a way that yes, we will keep ourselves safe, but at the same time, our market or patrons can still certainly feel comfortable and still enjoy whatever it is that we are offering. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. This was a fantastic discussion. I think we could go on forever. But it's like when people of culture come together. Even Adana herself told me, she herself enjoyed the social. So don't think that she's speaking against it. She too can't wait to get out. But of course, she's managing the risk, and her role here was to explain some things to us, and we thank her for that greatly. She taught us some new things, and as we even consider the things that we might write in that new handbook, the toolkit, and in the new atlas direction, the medical direction input that she would have given to us will be critical. It'll be part of our critical thinking. I wanted to ask Brian, do you think that there's a Labor Day? I know you're a Labor Day man. Even we're in the countdown to September. What will September bring? What will September look like? What's the perspective? Because we look at Colors Entertainment, as an international brand. So not only do they play a part here in Barbados in this sector, but they're also an export product. what does that necessarily look like? Ticket Pal, Caribbean, Jennifer and Dance in Africa, in terms of touring, Raj and the myriad of hospitality venues, and in his hospitality venues, not only supporting a local marketplace, but very much part of the tourist marketplace. And yes, Jennifer is also part of the tourist marketplace. How do we necessarily navigate that? And Andre, of course, bringing the perspective to the things that in our quiet moments that we should be considering in terms of how do we formalize ourselves in the sector? How do we formalize our thoughts? Because we are creatives, and Andre knows we creatives do not think linearly, and we're always on the go. So we always, this is the time that we actually determine how do we codify what it is that we want to do and what it is that we want to say. And even as a lobbying agent, and to say to the powers that be that we are ready and structured to make the necessary input to even strategic documents that will necessarily help us create some new entertainment sector. We've always thought about the 21st century, but now perhaps 2021 truly marks the start of the 21st century and some new age thoughts and abilities that this is what we do. We are the leaders in our sector in every specific viability, be it insurance, changing the outlook of sponsors, trying to make Barbados and the Barbadian, by extension Caribbean diaspora, to be more generous consumers of digital content. I know Joanne mentioned the support from Digicel, and we've had an earlier discussion, and we hope that it comes up in a later discussion where we will be trying to change the perspective of sponsors, or even engage them to the point for them to be full event partners, to make sure that we are actually being, if we go into the digital age, that they actually help us extend our reach. Andre, I wanted to talk about what does the creative economy Barbados brand look like. They've talked about the Tourism Barbados brand, but the Tourism Barbados brand does not exist without the culture and entertainment brand. And that has to be also considered. So what are we doing to make that important? We see the Trinidad brand, and we know it's exported. You see more red and black on all vehicles when you're overseas, then you're going to see the blue and yellow, and they are followers of their culture. What do we do to make sure that we extend our tentacles in that same way, and make sure that our diaspora maintain or help us maintain the consumption of our products? There's so many things still to talk about. We are pushing almost 3 hours, so this is like fantastic in terms of what the subject area was. But what of all the ideas that everyone has said and the exposure, they're all to be taken into consideration. And we are using this information to actually formalize ourselves better in terms of creating documentations. And as we present ourselves to other formal bodies, that we can use this information. We are learning that data is important. So even for ourselves, we must be taking that data into consideration. We had a lot of students on board this evening, so I really hope that they took a lot of the information to heart, and that will help them in terms of helping us develop the future of the sector. For all those who stayed on to the end, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you next Thursday at 6 o'clock. Look out for the links from BAEP, BCSI, and from all of us that we're going to be sharing. Adana, thank you so much for joining. I mean, you were like the other one coming in, so I think it allowed her to see the other side of us and to also give input. Raj, thank you so much for telling us like what perhaps is going on with you. How are we going to navigate the idea of passports and vaccines and figuring out what is going in this no touchy world? The debate continues. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone, and
Have
be
a
safe.
good night.
Good night.
You too.
Bye.